We've been getting some really exceptional performances from our fantasy football running backs, so it is so fun to go through these running back rankings. Starting out with our first here, Saquon is still at number 1 and Alvin Kamara is still at number 2. Now, Saquon Barkley and the Philadelphia Eagles, they're going to Tampa Bay to take on the Bucs this week. Now, the Buccaneers, I just don't really think it matters. Like, I don't care whether Saquon Barkley is playing the Bucs, whether he's playing the Ravens, whether he's playing the 49ers. Here, at home, or in Timbuktu, I think Saquon Barkley is simply the best fantasy back. He's being used like the workhorse. He is a stud, and the offensive line is still great, so there's no need to really talk about it anymore. Alvin Kamara at the Atlanta Falcons here. That Atlanta divisional matchup is maybe what makes me feel a little bit off about putting Alvin Kamara here, but Alvin Kamara, his floor is so safe when you take everything into account. The guy is obviously involved in the pass game, and he's averaging 20 carries per game right now. And on top of that, Atlanta is one of the worst at stopping the run. So I think Kamara is going to be great here. Another great performance from Kamara. And then Breece Hall at number 3. Listen, Breece Hall is at 3 right now. I'm getting a little nervous. Obviously, there's Braylon Allen. There's been that development that's definitely put a damper on a lot of Breece Hall managers here. And the weird thing is, it's not because Breece Hall's been bad. Breece Hall's been really, really good for the New York Jets. But there definitely seems to be a committee backfield brewing here. Now, against the Denver Broncos, I don't particularly love the matchup, but I don't think of Breece Hall as somebody who's dependent on a matchup to do well in fantasy. He'll do well either way, but the problem is I don't know what the foreseeable future is going to look like as far as the Braylon Allen and Breece Hall split in this backfield. So I've got him still here at 3, but we're going to have to keep an eye on this situation for sure. Now, dropping down to our next tier, I've got Kyren Williams back up here at number 4. Welcome back. Should have never left. It was a bad call by me last week. Going to Chicago to take on the Bears is a little bit of a shaky matchup here. I don't love the matchup potential, but here's the problem with the Bears defense, right? Their talent's great. They're a great defense. I've got no issues with the talent. The problem with the Bears defense is they're seeing the field so much because their offense just can't sustain drives. They're either going to hit on a big play or they're going to punt. So their defense is on the field constantly. And one thing with the Rams last week, out of all the backups that they had to play, they actually looked pretty good offensively, specifically that second half of the game versus the 49ers. So I think that Kyren Williams is obviously going to be a massive piece. He is the best guy on offense, so they have to feed him, and he looked really good doing it last week. Now, James Cook at number 5. Against the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore, look, James Cook has been lights out. He's been lights out, but the problem is it's strength on strength, right? So he's taking on the Baltimore Ravens defense, who has not been very good when you put it all together, especially in fantasy. But the problem with the Ravens defense, they've got the best run defense in the NFL so far. They're just not letting teams run on them. You've got to pass if you're going to beat the Ravens here. Now, James Cook has been so exceptional, and he's so particularly perfect for this Joe Brady offense that at this point, I really don't think it matters. Like, he's so good in this offense, I don't think it particularly matters whether the matchup is tough or whether it's not. But the one thing I will say about Cook is the matchup is tough, so take that how you want to. I don't really care. Now, Jordan Mason is at number 6 here, and Jordan Mason's taking on the Patriots. So there's obviously two ways of there's two trains of thought you can think about this one, right? Jordan Mason, clear number 1, workhorse running back, and is taking on a matchup in which they should win this game. Other way of thinking about this, the Patriots are a particularly decent run defense as well. Again, I don't think it particularly matters. The only thing that I get a little bit backed off on with Jordan Mason right now is the necessity to do it. It's very similar to Kyren, where it's like this offense is in shambles right now. Debo's doesn't look like he's coming back. Kittle's up in the air. Purdy's not even healthy. So it's like between a bad Ayuk, Juwan Jennings, and Jordan Mason, like there's going to be an emphasis to shut down the run. So it makes me a little nervous, but given that Jordan Mason's done so well and he plays for the 49ers, they're going to get it done on the ground. That's why I've still got him up here at number 6. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here, I've got James Conner at number 7 here. James Conner, I love the matchup. Obviously, he's taking on the Washington Commanders here. Now, James Conner, bad week he's coming off of. And I mentioned him as a buy low trade target. It's not because I think you're going to be able to sell people on James Conner being a bad fantasy player rest of season. I think this matchup is going to cure that question if anybody has it. You can put James Conner in very comfortably because the Washington Commanders are the Washington Commanders defense. As good as Jaden Daniels looked, he doesn't play on the defensive side of the ball. So James Conner, you take those first 2 games, see how efficient he was, and it's like, he's going to be fine. This guy is seeing all the work in the backfield. James Conner's going to be fine in this Cardinals offense. And then my 2 Detroit Lions running backs here, Jahmyr Gibbs at 8 and David Montgomery at 9. They've both been incredible. And it's not a surprise, right? I think most people knew that both Lions running backs were going to be elite in fantasy football. And the reality is David Montgomery is actually scoring more than a full point of fantasy points more than Jahmyr Gibbs is right now. Now, again, I still continue to prefer Jahmyr Gibbs between the 2 options because he gets the passing work. He's seeing over 4 targets per game, for crying out loud. And really, he should have had another touchdown last week on top of that misdirection touchdown that he got because he was wide open in the end zone. Goff forced the ball over to Amon-Ra St. Brown. But the reality is that whoever you've got, and even if you've got both of them, feel very comfortable starting both Lions running backs. They're taking on the Seahawks on Monday night at home. Both Lions running backs are going to be great again this week. That's one thing I'm sure of. And another thing I'm really sure of is Patrick Mahomes' line on underdog this week. They've got him at 0.5 total yards, so obviously that's a higher pick right there. And if you haven't taken advantage of it on underdog yet, use that link in the comments below. And when you use code FFN to deposit at least $10, they'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 of bonus cash. And you'll also be able to take advantage of the Patrick Mahomes free line right there. Now, dropping down to our next tier, I've got Aaron Jones here at number 10. The Green Bay Packers, I love this revenge game narrative. He's going to Green Bay to take on his former team. And listen, Aaron Jones has been really good in fantasy so far. It's part of the whole surprise of the Minnesota Vikings to me, which is that Aaron Jones is kind of being used seldomly how he was in Green Bay, but he's so freaking efficient. I don't get it. I guess that's where I struggle with Aaron Jones here, but I'm buying into the revenge game narrative here. I think there will be a mandate and an offensive effort to get Aaron Jones the ball and get him in space as they have all year and have a really good game. So I'm buying into this matchup here against the Green Bay Packers, and I think Aaron Jones has a good one this week. And then Derrick Henry at 11, taking on the Buffalo Bills at home. Not exactly an ideal matchup, but the dude went nuclear. Last week, really, you should expect it once in a while because if he gets the right matchup, like Derrick Henry's going to go off. Now, I don't think this is a particularly great matchup. I think he'll be very similar to how he's been the first 2 weeks if you take out week 3. I think that's what he'll be very similar to, where it's like he probably gets his week saved by a red zone touchdown. But of course, coming off a big week, there's going to be momentum here for Derrick Henry. So I do like the chances that he ends up having another pretty good week, but it won't be as good as he did in week 3 versus a bad Cowboys defense. And then at number 12 and 13, I've got Bijan Robinson and Jonathan Taylor. Listen, Bijan Robinson has been not great again in fantasy this year. Like, it's disappointing. It's definitely disappointing, but I continue to rank him where I believe he should be ranked, which is around this area, because Bijan Robinson is still getting plenty of work. He's averaging 20 opportunities per game. This offense is running through him. So while he hasn't been that effective at scoring yet and getting fantasy points, it's going to come. Now, this week against the Saints, don't love the matchup at all. That's a tough matchup for Bijan to take advantage of. But just based on opportunities alone, I'm still going to have him here at number 12. And then Jonathan Taylor, opportunities went up. And look at that. He was excellent. He was excellent in fantasy. He had a massive week in week 3. This is, again, another tough matchup here. Against the Steelers, I think they're going to know exactly what's coming. They know that that Anthony Richardson, they're going to try to make him throw, right? Like, they're going to force Anthony Richardson to beat the Steelers here this week. So it's like with Jonathan Taylor, I don't know how much they can actually fool the Pittsburgh Steelers defense into thinking the run isn't coming a good 60 to 70% of the time. So Jonathan Taylor, I just think runs kind of into a buzzsaw defense this week. And while he is matchup proof to a certain extent, I do think the Steelers defense has been playing out of their minds right now. So I do think Jonathan Taylor maybe has a little bit of a down week. Brian Robinson at 14. To round out the tier, listen, Arizona Cardinals, the matchup is pretty good, and Brian Robinson Jr. obviously has been really good in fantasy this year. Now, his week largely got saved by a touchdown in week 3 against the Bengals, but the other question here is whether Austin Eckler is going to be back. I heard that Austin Eckler didn't even fly with the team home after week 3, so probably not a great indication that he's doing too well. At least he wasn't doing too well after that Monday night game. So Brian Robinson may be in line for 100% of this running back work. And against the Arizona Cardinals, I do think it's a good matchup for him to take advantage of. And I just think he's a really good player in fantasy this year. Dropping now to our next tier. Josh Jacobs at 15 and Tony Pollard at 16. Josh Jacobs, I'm a little deflated on right now. I'll be honest here, because after a week where he had 30 carries, and I was like, he's going to take the lion's share again because Marshawn Lloyd's out. Well, they end up splitting work. Him and Emmanuel Wilson end up splitting work. And Wilson actually has the better fantasy week. So it does make me uneasy, and this matchup is brutal. Now, I personally think that Josh Jacobs will end up getting the majority of the touches this week because, especially against a great defense like the Minnesota Vikings, a bad matchup for the Green Bay run offense, they're probably going to want to have Josh Jacobs carry the majority because Josh Jacobs, he's still been pretty efficient this year running behind that offensive line. So one game with Emmanuel Wilson is not going to sway me too much. I do think the matchup is bad, but I do think Josh Jacobs ends up handling a good workload this week. Tony Pollard, bad week. There's no other way to say it. Really bad week on a week where Tyjae Spears was injured, and we all thought he's going to be good play this week. Yeah, he wasn't. He was exactly the opposite of that. He was terrible. Now, against the Dolphins this week, I think the matchup's great. I think it's a get-right game for Tony Pollard. You put those first 2 weeks together, and it's like he was clearly the running back one. And against the Miami Dolphins this week, who is not a good defense, I do think it's a get-right game for Tony Pollard. I think he may end up being their best fantasy option on the Tennessee side of the ball. So I think it's a good game for Tony Pollard to get right against the Dolphins. That's why I've got him here at 16. And then Zach Charbonnet / Kenneth Walker. That's who I've got here at 17. So obviously, if Kenneth plays, it's going to be Kenneth that's going to be here. And then if Charbonnet plays, it's going to be him. The reality is they've both been great in fantasy. There's nothing that you could take away. Sharp has been great the 2 weeks without Kenneth, and obviously Kenneth was great in week 1. So you may think, why are they this low? They're playing the Lions this week. The Lions are a good run defense here. That's the one strength they've had defensively, along with pass rush, mostly because of Aiden Hutchinson. But that's the reason why they're down this low. So ultimately, the team is going to be run first, and whoever gets a running back start nod is going to be a very playable option and a high-end play in fantasy football as far as running back twos go, I would say. But I would say that Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker probably have a little bit of a down week, whoever plays, versus the Detroit Lions run defense. And then rounding out the tier, Devin Singletary at 18. Devin Singletary taking on the Cowboys, actually one of my favorite starts of the week. Truly, the Cowboys defense has been atrocious. They're actually the worst run defense in the NFL right now. The very worst. That says a lot. Now, I think that Devin Singletary still plays for bad offense. I still don't think the Giants are that good. So I'm putting him down at 18, kind of as my insurance here, just in case he doesn't do well. I actually do think he's going to do well this week against the Cowboys. Singletary scored last week. He's actually had a string of okay games in fantasy. And I think that this defense that they're playing against the Cowboys is really just not a little. They were really overrated by many, including me, before the start of the season. Now, dropping out to our next tier, J.K. Dobbins is at 19 this week. J.K. Dobbins is at 19, and I called him a buy low earlier in the week. I still believe he is. I don't think this is the greatest game for J.K. Dobbins here. It's not only that he's playing the Chiefs, a divisional opponent who's very good defensively, it's also in result of two starting tackles. They're both out this week. Joe Alt, rookie, and Rashawn Slater, they're both going to miss this game. So they're banged up. And on top of that, maybe it's not Justin Herbert. Maybe it is a backup quarterback that is going to be taking snaps here. So altogether, there's a lot of issues here on this Chargers offense for J.K. Dobbins to have a really good week this week. But the one encouraging thing that I came away with last week is that he's starting to take over. Gus Edwards was almost irrelevant in that game versus the Steelers. I think if J.K. Dobbins starts to take control, J.K.'s so explosive that we could see a big run pop off. That's why I think he's still playable, but this is not the greatest matchup. Maybe wait a week to buy J.K. Dobbins, actually. Travis Etienne is at 20, and Zach Moss is at 21. Travis Etienne is... I mean, listen, he was fine last week. Like, he did as well as he could have against the Buffalo Bills, who just absolutely... I mean, they were massacred on that Monday night game. I just think that Travis Etienne is going to suffer from what many believed to be a great offense before the year. He's suffering from a bad offense. It's a bad team. And they're taking on the Houston Texans defense, who is not particularly friendly to running backs. So I do think that this could be a bad matchup for Travis Etienne, and I just really think that realistically, the concerns aren't really with workload at this point with me, because Tank Bigsby has taken a little bit of a backseat, but the concerns for me are that his offense is just not very good. So he's got to be saved by receptions. Zach Moss at 21 at the Carolina Panthers. I refuse to think it's a bad matchup, right? Like, obviously the Raiders couldn't get anything going because the Raiders are garbage. Like, their offense is garbage. Now the Bengals, they've struggled to establish a run, but their offense is not garbage. Joe Burrow will create opportunities for Zach Moss to do well, and Zach Moss kind of got saved a little bit by a garbage time touchdown in week 3 versus the Commanders, but I do think this matchup is still good. I think he's okay as a running back, and I do think the opportunity this week is pretty decent here. Now, rounding out this tier, Chuba Hubbard at 22 and Najee Harris at 23. Chuba Hubbard was excellent last week. I was really happy. That was the one thing that I took away from the Raiders-Carolina Panthers game, was how bad the Raiders defense is and how great my guy Chuba Hubbard did. I was really happy to see it, and I think this matchup's great too. I think the matchup is really setting him up for success. Another week straight in fantasy football, and maybe creates an argument within that Panthers organization. Do we play Jonathan Brooks right away in week 5, or do we go ahead and we stick with Chuba Hubbard? Because Chuba Hubbard, if he puts together 2 straight good performances, it's going to be hard to sit this guy down, and I think it's going to happen again. And then Najee Harris, there's a couple factors to this. This is the highest he's been for me all season long, and there's a reason for it. There's several reasons for it. Number 1, Jaylen Warren's injured again. And according to Mike Tomlin, he should be viewed as week to week rather than day to day. That indicates that he's not going to be playing in this game against the Indianapolis Colts here. So Najee could be in line for a 20-carry game at the very minimum here. And the other part of this is the Colts are really bad on their run defense. They have a really bad run defense here. So Najee may very well get in the end zone for the first time this year. I think it's very possible that Najee ends up having a decent game here. He's got a solid floor, I think, this week, just because of the bad run defense and because of the volume. But obviously his ceiling is never that high because he's not an explosive player. But I do think this week could get in the end zone. Dropping down to our next tier, Jerome Ford at 24, Cam Akers at 25, and Carson Steele at 26. Now with Jerome Ford, obviously his issue is workload. Like, they just don't seem to want to commit to him, and I think the reason is he's just not that good. Like, let's just call it how it is. He's really not that great of a player. Against the Raiders defense, I think the matchup's fine, and I think the Browns can run the ball. But the problem is that Jerome Ford is just still getting limited work. So Jerome Ford, opportunity should be there against a bad defense, but I don't think that Jerome Ford has separated himself enough from Deonta Foreman up to this point. Cam Akers at 25. Listen, the reality is that Cam Akers, his week was saved by a touchdown. Like, that's the only reason he was relevant. He averaged less than 3 yards per carry. It was a bad week. And obviously the matchup was bad. Like, the Vikings, that matchup was bad. And not just the matchup, like the game script was not in favor of running the ball. This week it's in favor of a run game. Against the Jags here that just got ripped up by James Cook and the whole Buffalo offense, the game script should be there. So it's like, if Cam Akers can't do it this week, I don't know what to tell you. We should just be waiting for Mixon to come back to play a Texans running back. Based on what I've seen, it doesn't look like Mixon's going to play because he's still considered week to week. So Cam Akers does look like the running back one this week. Carson Steele to round it out at the Los Angeles Chargers this week. People will contest this. I'm aware of it because if you haven't heard, Kareem Hunt did get put on the active roster on Tuesday. So he is officially on the active roster. We'll see what his workload looks like. I still don't know. like what he'll be able to do, because the reality is like he's an older player who's been inefficient the last several years, and on top of the fact, I think there's a reason they put him on the practice squad, which is that he wasn't in playing shape yet. So maybe they just kind of work him back into the lineup a little bit this week, but based on last week, what we have to go off of is Carson Steele is the lead carry guy. So Carson Steele, I think he ends up leading the backfield once again this week, and against the Chargers, not a great matchup. He wasn't great anyways, so I think he's kind of a lower end option here at the running back position this week. Dropping down to our last tier, Ramondre Stevenson at 27. Kind of back where he belongs. Let's be honest about this one. He's averaging less than 10 fantasy points per game now, and he's taking on the San Francisco 49ers defense. Like, it's just not that high upside. And put on top of the fact that he's fumbled the ball several times this year, and according to many sources, put a target on his back. And it's not really like a source thing. Like, you can decipher that. Any defense is going to look at this guy and say, just attack the ball. Make sure to punch the ball out when you're about to tackle this guy, because he's not been taking care of the ball. So Ramondre may lose touches as a result to his ball insecurity. And I gotta tell you, like, this offense is already not high upside, so if he loses volume, good luck getting fantasy upside. Now dropping down to 28 and 29, Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. Some of you may have been wondering where Rachaad White was. A lot of Rachaad White truthers don't like me, and I gotta tell you, I like you guys, but I get why you don't like me. Because the reality is, Rachaad White, I've been saying for weeks, if he loses volume, good luck. And he lost volume. Now, I'll extend an olive branch to Rachaad White truthers out there. He is dealing with a groin injury probably. Like, he did go out in week 2 with a groin injury, so like, chances are good he's not fully healthy right now. But like, there's nothing like helping your case right here. Honestly, like, Bucky Irving just looks like the better player. So the reason I've still got Rachaad White one spot over him against the Eagles defense is because I don't know if I'm ready to commit to them benching Rachaad White. I think he'll still be involved to a certain level. But Bucky Irving, earlier in the week, head coach Todd Bowles said, yeah, he's earned more touches. Of course he has. He's been so much better than Rachaad White. So I think Bucky Irving's a viable play this week. And if you want to take the upside, I actually think it's on Bucky Irving's side this week. And then rounding it all out, Tyjae Spears at number 30 at the Miami Dolphins this week. Tyjae Spears is a very playable guy this week. He's very playable. Based on last week, I think that this matchup is also great. Based on last week, he was involved as a pass catcher. So if he can kind of maintain that pass catching upside, I just like him better than any other option here. Like Javonte Williams, that's a no. Zamir White shouldn't even be on a fantasy roster at this point. So like for me, like with all the other backups that I kind of saw after this guy, I think Tyjae Spears probably just has the most upside against a good matchup against the Miami Dolphins. And as I do at the end of every rankings video, I give you my favorite underdog running back of the week, specifically tailored for people who are playing underdog best ball drafts on Underdog today. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this one. I don't have a ton of excitement for it. I always pick somebody outside the top 30. This week, I've got Rico Dowdle. Against the New York Giants, I think the matchup is actually pretty decent here. And the reality is that he's taking over the backfield. Zeke looks bad. He looks old. He looks washed, as he did last year. And Rico Dowdle looks like the best running back. Now, does that mean he's going to get any kind of fantasy relevance? I don't think so, because they just don't run the ball very much. There's really not much balance in this Dallas Cowboys offense, but I will say out of the guys who aren't inside the top 30, I think Rico Dowdle has the best potential to hit a big game this week. So let me know how your team's looking so far this week, and if you want to see the top 12 defense rankings for this week, click on this video right here.